welcome to this Make Your Data Work Monday. Today is the 13th of April 2020 and thank you for joining me for this special edition. I'm here to help people who are struggling with their data and struggling with self-isolation. So if you have any questions, please do send me an email or check my email throughout. In the meantime, however, in order to get us started, I thought we'd have a quick quiz tour of Microsoft Azure Machine Learning. I'm not sure if business intelligence people are familiar with the concepts, so let's take a look. To get started, you need to sign up with a Microsoft account in Azure, as you might expect. The URL for that is ml.azure.com. Once you are set up, there are plenty of opportunities for you to use Azure Machine Learning in your own environments. So here we have the Azure Machine Learning Studio, and this is where all the fun happens with AI in Microsoft's Azure. So one great place to get started is the designer. Now, Azure Machine Learning is aimed at people who have never really used AI before. It's not expecting you to be a coder. However, if you are a heavy-duty data science user, then you are able to bring in your R or Python code, and at that point, you're able to use your data sources in the cloud. So that really empowers you to start moving towards much larger data sources and unstructured data sources. So what we have here is Azure Machine Learning. So let's get started. For those of you who are familiar with Microsoft SQL Server Integration Services, the interface may look familiar to you. So while I'm waiting to see if there are any questions, I'll continue with this. If you do have a question about your specific data, then please go to the Q&A section of the webinar and pop your question in there. So this is the designer, and this is where we start to create machine learning experiments using Azure. So there's a few different ways to get started, but one major way is to get started using the designer. The designer is the canvas on which we can put together all of our experiments in Azure Machine Learning. So on the left-hand side, we have our data sets here. I've got some sample data sets which I've set up. And here are some other samples available to us as well. The one that I'm going to use is the online shopping data set. I've got this one from GitHub. You can see the column names appear in the first two rows here. And for machine learning, what we want to do is we want to try and work out exactly what the outcome is going to be. So we're looking for a prediction. So here's the predicted outcome here. It's false. We want to predict if somebody actually purchased an item or not. So what we do is we are going to see if anyone spent any revenue. If they did, then the answer is going to be true, but if they did not, it will return false. So that means that many of these shoppers are actually going to show as a false because they didn't buy anything. So let's see if we can use this system in order to predict who is most likely to make a purchase or not. So here we have the online shopping data set here. We can see it has some outputs, and when we visualize the data, we can see that visualized data appearing in Azure Machine Learning. It's in the outputs box. So we see here that the revenue is showing as false and true. This tells us that it's binary. And we can see that by the feature type here. So the first thing we tend to want to do in artificial intelligence or any machine learning is take some descriptive statistics. So that's quite straightforward to do in Azure Machine Learning. We have got the option here called statistical functions, and we have got the opportunity here to summarize data. So I'm going to drag and drop that component here. So I need to connect them up. So I'm going to connect online shopping to the summarized data component by collecting the output of online shopping with the input of summarized data. So let's see what the results will be when we press the Submit button. In Azure Machine Learning, we need to set up some Azure Artifacts behind the scenes in order to run our experiments. So for that, I'm going to click on the Compute target, and I'm going to select one of the compute targets I've already got available. I've also got a name for my pipeline. So I'm going to call it Make Your Data Work. Monday. So we can see here that the name has changed. So I've changed the name, I've set the compute target, and now I'm going to click Submit. Now I can create a new experiment or run this on an existing experiment. The experiment is the part that holds together all of the pipelines. What we want to do is we want to create a new experiment. I'm going to give it the same name, and I'm going to call it experiment. You can see here it doesn't like anything without spaces, so you can see here it doesn't like spaces, so I'm going to submit that experiment name. And now the experiment is going to run. This is very, very basic, and all it's going to do is it's going to set up the pipeline to run. So while that's executing, let's talk more about the dataset. In Azure Machine Learning, we set up datasets, and you can see these over the right-hand side here. Sorry, over the left-hand side here. So when we click on datasets, we can see the online shopping dataset is specified. It is identified as having a web URL, and we can see that format here. And here's the original file with the same information. So now we can go back to our pipeline and have a quick look to see how it's proceeded. It says it's completed, so we can see the results dataset. The output and the logs are here, but let's look for a more visual way that we can see the pipeline. So when we go to Designer, we can see the pipeline specified here, and I can see my summarized data. So when I click on Summarize Data module, I can see the details are over here. I have the output logs, and I have the ability to visualize the data. So now I've visualized the data, I can see some interesting statistics about the data. For example, it shows that there are no missing values in the data, which is always important to check. The minimum values we can see here. They're either 0 or 1. For some of these, there will be no minimum values, such as a month or visitor type. These are strings. Weekend and revenue are indicated as being binary, so they are just indicated as false. So now that we have set up our experiment, let's make it more interesting. So the first thing we want to do in an experiment is convert the revenue column to be a label. A label is the column that we are trying to predict. So to do that, we can use some functionality called Edit Metadata. You can see this column appear here on the left-hand side. So I can now connect online shopping with Edit Metadata. Try that again. So I can connect online shopping with the metadata here. When I click on the metadata column, there is an edit column functionality here, and the column that I would like to get is one called revenue. And it's right down the bottom. This is a column that we want to be the label or the item that we are trying to predict. We're going to change it from a Boolean to an integer, zeros and ones, and we're going to make it categorical, and we're also going to specify that this is the label. If we wanted to rename it, we could do that in the new column names here. So that's our Edit Metadata column. So what we can do now is we can split the data into training and test sets. So there is a module for that as well. So I'm going to drag and drop that to the canvas. And we can see the Edit Metadata appears here. So with split data, normally we expect our training set and our test set to be split into a 70-30 split. The default here is 0.5. I want to change that so it appears as 0.7. So that's changed. When we click on split data, we can see the changes being committed. So what we can do then is think about which model we'd like to train our data on. So we have a train module here. And the training data for split data can go to the right-hand side here. And this means that we need to understand which model we are going to try and use to model our data. We can use more than one. So let's have a quick look at the models that are available. You can see the facility here for model training. There's a few options here. We've got train clustering model, a train model, and we have also got train hyperparameters. We can talk about those another day. Basically, those are the parameters for tweaking models so that they perform better. So there's actually a list of machine learning algorithms. If you're not sure which one to use, you can use the Azure ML cheat sheet. And you can see that displayed on the screen here. So when we look at the page, we can see a cheat sheet down here. And it starts with the question, what do you want to do? Now, in our example, we want to predict between several categories. Alternatively, because we're starting in a very simple way, we could predict between two categories. Yes, they did buy, or no, they did not buy. So we want to use this one. We want to predict between two categories. That means that we are looking at the box which appears down the bottom here. Two-class classification. I'm going to put that in an orange box. So in real life, I'd probably want to try all of these to see how well they perform. So what we could do, as a very simple starting point, is a two-class decision forest. That's going to set up a solution that will be accurate, and it should hopefully involve giving us some fast training. So let's see how that works, and we'll have a look at what the output is. So when we go back to Machine Learning Studio, we can look for two-class. We can see the decision forest here. and that is going to connect to the train model output here. When we click on train model, it wants to understand what the label column is. We know that's the revenue column. So it says to run the modules before this one. We don't know what the metadata is, but we know ours is called revenue. So after we train our model, we want to score our model. We want to understand the performance better. So here we take the output of the trained model, and this is where our test dataset comes in. Our split data module comes up with two separate datasets, split, and it has training and test. So we're going to take the test dataset and put it to the score model calculation here. So when we click on score model, that's going to compare the test data to the model and see how well it performs. So the final step is we want to evaluate the model. And that can go right down the bottom. And that's our experiment finished. All we need to do now is execute this particular experiment. So we do that by hitting the Submit button at the top. So we'll keep the experiment and the pipeline name as the same. What we could do as well is we could use the interface in order to create and run our experiments. The other thing we can do is use the Azure ML SDK for Python in order to execute and run experiments. So to do that, let's go to the Azure portal. And in the Azure portal, you can see I've clearly got a lot of things in here. We want to look for machine learning. So I'm going to have a quick look, and we can see machine learning here. There we go. So here's the DP100 exams, which is the name of the machine learning workspace that I have set up. What we can do is we can access the studio this way. We can also see other artifacts involved in our workspace. And we can see those, for example, our experiments, we can see those in here. So this is our experiment, which is running at the moment. So when we go back to the overview page, we can see some interesting information about the workspace. So we can see the resource group, we can see the storage, the key vault, we can see this sort of information. When we go back to the studio, we can see that's still running. What I'd like to do is go in and show you the notebooks. When we look in the workspace here, we have got the opportunity to use notebooks in the machine learning workspace. So when we click in our notebooks folder, we can see that we start to get a number of notebooks set up for us. There's a samples folder, which you can see here. And then there is my user files. And then we can look under here, it's samples, and under Python. And then we can see the version of Python here, 1.2.0. And then there's some tutorials as well here. So what we can do is we can actually clone this to my user folder, and then we can have a good look at them. So when I click on clone, it's going to go into the user file directory. I've got this already set up, so I'm just going to put it here and clone. So now it's going to clone the notebooks into my workspace. And we now have got successful in terms of conducting our clone. So when I click on tutorials, we can see our update here. I'm just checking to see if there's any questions in the webinar. No, nothing at the moment, but if you have any, please put them in the Q&A. And once we've stopped this demo, we'll make sure and we will go through them. So let's have a look at the notebooks that we have available to us here. We can click on the tutorials folder and we can see that there's a folder here called Create First ML Experiment. Once we have done that, we can see if there's any of the files that are relevant to here. Create First ML Experiment. We could load this file here and have a look at it. That's the YAML file. We can see some other examples down here, such as connecting to a database. We've got some outputs here. You can see lots of pickle files, things that I've been working on. And I've got another sample there. I was playing around with some data. So here's an example where we could train our first model. So if we want to edit this particular notebook, we could edit it in one of the facilities here. I'm just going to use Jupyter. Now we can see the file here. What I could do is make a copy, and I'm going to call it Make Your Data Work. Now I've renamed it. This means that my version will be different from other people's. And my version will be different from the default versions because I want to play around with this one. So the first thing we could do is see if we can execute our experiments, see what information we get back. So the first thing that we want to do is invoke Azure ML Core and import the workspace class. So I'm going to click on Run. And when it goes from an asterisk to a number, that means that we are ready to go. Now I'm going to import an experiment. But instead of importing this one, I'm going to call it Make Your Data Work. One day. Oops. Experiment. And let's see if it will import that one. So we can set our data store name as well. So let's see what the data store name is for this particular experiment. It's still running, so at least we can keep going. So the data store for this one, we were using datasets. So I think we'll leave that one as it is. The data store should exist, so let's see if it will run. Then we can print the workspace. So we've got the workspace here. The actual data store name is DP100 exams. And then the resource is philanthropy. When we go back to Azure Machine Learning, we see here that the name of the workspace is indeed DP100 exams. So that's correct. And the resource name is MS Philanthropy. So that's correct too. So now we can create a data set using the Python SDK. Here we access CSV files stored in the Azure Data Store. So what I would have to do at this point is get my data from the CSV file. I didn't do that, I took it straight from the web. But what we could do is have a quick look and see what data is already in the dataset. So I've set up a data store path called UCI. In this particular dataset, it's getting data which is from Delicious ML. So I've used that as a quick example. So once I've done that, I can load and prepare data for training. I can do different things with it. Then I could train a model against it. But that's not what we're doing here. I just wanted really to show you something about Azure while the experiment was running. So let's have a quick look and see how it's doing. Oops. So Azure Machine Learning, let's go back to our workspace, which I will open here, and we'll see how our experiments are doing. Now, since this is a live session, I'm just going to check to see if I have got any further questions. If you have any, please pop them in the Q&A or send me an email. You should have my email of the registration. I can either deal with them as part of the webinar, or deal with them privately afterwards. Just let me know what suits you best. I'm recording this one, but of course it's confidential, and I will remove and cut the recording before we discuss anything that's specifically confidential, so please don't worry about that. Okay, so let's go back and look at our experiments. So experiments are over on the left-hand side here. You can see for Make Your Data Work Monday, I've got 3 experiments there. So it says the third run has completed and it took 9 minutes. So let's have a quick look at the results. So this is our chart. We can see that everything ran. I'm just going to go back to the designer and take a look at it in more detail. So now we can see our results. So if I flip down, I can never quite see the... So let's go to Navigator, that may help. Right down to the bottom. So what we can see here is our data has been trained using the 2-class decision forest. When we go to Evaluate Model, we can see the output in terms of charts. So we can see the ROC curve here. That's the receiving operator characteristic curve. Very high level. The quicker it gets up to the highest point in the left corner, the better it is. What this chart is doing is it's measuring the true positive rate against the false positive rate. So that looks like a good result. In terms of accuracy, precision, and the F1 score, it looks to be quite accurate. We have the results there. And then we can look further down. We can see the data down here. So in this very small test, we can see we've had a reasonable accuracy just with one small data set. But of course, if this was a real life scenario, I want to try different models and try more data than that. But this was just to give you a quick introduction to Azure ML. And we also had a quick look on using data in a Jupyter notebook to connect to the Azure ML SDK for Python and see how we could use it that way. So I'll just check for any questions. Rachel. So I'm just going to end the webinar here. The purpose of the session was to give people the opportunity to get some help with their data. I tend to do this piece first as an icebreaker. I can see I've had a question come in at the moment, so I'm just going to go and deal with that. I will send out an email when the next session is, which will be next Monday. and I'll let you know the time of that. I haven't set up times. If you're interested, please keep up to date with my blog. You can also sign up to my newsletter to find out additional dates. So the next one will be on the 20th of April, and we will do that at 8 AM in the morning, okay, UK time. So unless there's any other questions, I'm going to close the webinar here, and I'll deal with the private question that's just came in. But thank you all for attending. Thank you.